All right, welcome everyone. We will get started in just a second here, but for 1 minute, we're just going to wait until we hit critical mass and have some more people join us. So we'll just give it 1 minute. As we are waiting, go ahead and start to introduce yourselves in the chat if you would like, your name, your age, and the name of the zoo, aquarium, or museum that you are here representing today. All right, so again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the kickoff for advocacy training for youth leaders and conservation. Once again, before we get started, I just wanted to ask you a little bit of an icebreaker question. So like I said, go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat. We would love to learn where all of our attendees are from, your name, age, and the name of the zoo, aquarium, and museum you are representing. But what I also want to do is get everybody kind of thinking about some of the outdoor spaces in your local community that you think are worth protecting. So if you could share a little anecdote or a story or just even an example of your favorite blue or green space, land or body of water, why you love it, and why you think it should be protected. Oh, thank you, Baylee, for fixing the chat.
No problem. I've only been stuck there like 8 other times. So
Awesome.
I knew the quick fix, but like I said, it's all fixed, guys. So flood the chat.
Thank you, everybody who messaged in the Q&A to let me know that the chat was disabled while I was speaking. So again, thank you all so much. We're so excited for this kickoff. We'll give it a second again if you guys want to introduce yourself in the chat. Illinois, Ohio, Florida, San Diego, Nashville. Oh, this is amazing. We have so many people from so many different places. Oh my goodness, this is awesome. Wow, I am so excited to get to chat with all of you and start this discussion. It is really amazing to see how many different places we have attendees from, so many different ages, so many different facilities and states, and I'm sure all of you are going to have really good questions during our Q&A too. So once again, thank you. I do want to share a little bit about myself, give you guys some context on who I am and what I do before we get started. So my name is Laura Johnson. My pronouns are she, they. I am 25 years old and I currently live in Long Beach, California. I am the youth program supervisor at the Ocean Project. So I'm the person who's been sending you all of the emails and all of the Google invites and answering all of your questions. So again, I've been at the Ocean Project for almost 2 years now, coming up in March, and I get to work with our World Ocean Day Youth Advisory Council and a bunch of our other programs, including advocacy training. I'm just so excited to be talking about this right now, and I'm so excited to introduce our panel in just a minute. But before we get started, I wanted to just run through a few things. So I'm going to share my screen. And welcome to session 1 conservation policy and 30 by 30. So as you all know, this is session 1 of 4. The official schedule for each of our sessions has been included in the last couple of emails that I've sent out to you all. And it was also sent out, I believe, on Thursday as a PNG image file. You can also find that in our Google Drive. I'll send that link in the chat if you did not receive that email, to make sure that you have it. Now, again, I know weekends can be a little bit tricky. Thank you again, taking time out of your day to join us. I would encourage you, even though session 3 is on a Friday and it is the weekend, I really want to make sure that you guys are able to join live. If you can, try to make an effort to do so. All of the program content kind of builds on itself from session to session. So we really want to make sure that you are able to participate in those discussions. But of course, if you can't make it, all of the sessions are recorded and those recordings will be uploaded to the Google Drive at the end after the program. So moving into the start of our session, I wanted to introduce a very special friend of the Ocean Project, a little clip of Dr. Enrique Sala from National Geographic Pristine Seas. He did the keynote speaker presentation at the American Association of Zoos and Aquariums annual conference back in 2019. So as a lot of the attendees today are associated with zoos, aquariums, and museums, you might be familiar with the 30 by 30 program and campaign. And that's going to be what we're going to be talking about a lot today. So what I wanted to do was just share this little, it's like a 4-minute clip from Enrique's session. So I'm going to pull that video up here. Okie dokie. Okay.
And bad news. And here's the good news. We can save this place. And even the large predators came back, like the groupers, the sharks, and the jacks. You can see this in Cabo Pulmo now every day. And you know who else is thriving? Those visionary fishermen who are now making far more money from tourism inside the reserve and fishing around it. And I've seen this in many other places around the world. You know, on average, the abundance of fish is 6 times greater inside the reserves than outside it. And once these reserves are repopulated with wildlife, then the tourists come in, and the economic revenue far offsets the. In the Great Barrier Reef, for example, that ecosystem brings in $5 billion to the Australian economy every single year. In the United States, every dollar that our government invests in our national parks produces a return of $10 that go through tourism mostly, that go to the local economy. But right now, not enough of our planet is protected. Now, how much do we need to protect? And this is what the research tells us. If we want to prevent the loss of 1 million species and the collapse of our life support system, if we want to avert climate catastrophe by staying below 2 degrees Celsius, we need half of our planet in natural state. Where do we stand now? Well, only 7% of the ocean is in implemented or planned protected areas. And only 2% of the ocean is fully protected from fishing or other activities. On the land, we're doing a little better, but still only 15% of our land is protected. Getting half of our planet to its natural state is going to require all of us doing all we can in every aspect of our lives. But if we want to get there, we need to commit first together to protecting at least 30% of our planet by 2030. If we can go from apex predators to apex protectors, then we have a chance. And this is the focus of our work today. You know, it's an ambitious goal.
All right, so I just wanted to share that video from Enrique Sala, again, of National Geographic Pristine Seas. We were lucky enough to have him on as a speaker for our session, one of our sessions for advocacy training for the World Ocean Day Youth Council earlier in 2022. So I just wanted to have that little video as an introductory clip to give us a little starting off point. But now I am so excited to pass it over to Baylee. Oh, here we go. Hold on. And there we go. Pass it over to Baylee, our lovely panel facilitator, who I have had the joy of knowing for 6, almost 7 years now, a true friend of mine and an incredible advocate for the planet. And she is going to be working with our panelists today. So Baylee, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Laura. You always remind me how long we've known each other, and it brings me so much joy that the entirety of knowing each other, we've been in this space, helping to protect the planet. Hi, everyone. My name is Baylee Ritter. I'm so thrilled and excited to be here with all of you today. I would tell you my job description, but it's essentially just being the Ryan Seacrest for ocean conservation. You know, I'm just kind of there leading the chats. But no, seriously, I'm the strategic advisor for the Youth Initiative for the Ocean Project, as well as a proud Illinoisan. I don't know how you say that, but I see all of you Illinois folks in the chat. Hi, everyone. Also, thank you for inspiring my next vacation. I'm going to a lot of the places you put in the chat. Thank you for adding to my bucket list. I am here to essentially bring these 3 awesome speakers together to share their knowledge, their light on a topic that is really close to both Laura and I, and a topic close to all of them as well. But before we hear from them, perhaps we should get to know who they are. So in no order in particular, well, Anupa's up first, so that's who we're going with. I'm popcorning to you, Anupa. But to Carlos, Anupa, and Alex, if you want to tell us your name, where you're from, your job. You can also say the Ryan Seacrest of your job, but your legitimate job and why you care about blue spaces. What has led you to be in the space that you're in today?
Thanks, Baylee. Great to be here. So thanks for having me as well. My name is Anupa Asokan. My pronouns are she, her, and I live and work on Tongva land, also known as Los Angeles, California. I currently work at NRDC, which is the Natural Resources Defense Council, and my, official title is a Senior Oceans Advocate. And what that means, well, I'm focused mainly on 30 by 30 for the ocean in the state of California and also federally. And I work on advancing equity in U.S. fishery management. Outside of work, I serve on the National Board of Directors for the Surfrider Foundation, and I try and play in the ocean as much as I can. It's my happy place and where I love to be. I studied oceanography in college and in graduate school, and I've worked at places like the World Surf League, X Prize Foundation, and NOAA, which you might be familiar with. They're the federal agency responsible for managing, studying our ocean and also our weather. And I think, I mentioned I just love to play in the ocean. So it's sort of what inspires me. It's what brings me joy and happiness. And, I'm happy to dedicate my days, my work days, to advocating to protect my favorite place. Did I answer the question?
Popcorning. That was fantastic. That was like a TED Talk. That was wonderful. Let's see who's next. We're popcorning over to Carlos.
Thank you, and great to be on this panel with you all. My name is Carlos Ochoa. I go with he, him pronouns, and I am based in Washington, D.C., also the ancestral homelands of the Anacostan. So I'm really excited to be a part of this group, especially with Anupa and Alex, who are the other panelists. I work for the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, or NCEL for short. We are a nationwide network of over 1,200 state legislators from all 50 states and from both major political parties, working specifically to advance environmental issues that are intended to conserve, protect, or improve our environment. Of the issues that we work on, the ocean is one of the program areas that is in our organization, and I get to have the privilege of being the ocean program manager for this organization. And so previously, I used to work for Azul, which is a environmental justice group that is based in California, but has been doing a lot of great work both in California federally and in the international level as well. And outside of working on issues that are important to the ocean and to the coasts, I love to spend my time by rock climbing, skiing, or obviously with the ocean, going to the beach. I cannot surf yet. I'm also terrified of the open ocean, but it doesn't scare me from really enjoying and appreciating just how important that environment is, and why we're all here today talking about it, and looking forward to talking more about this particular topic.
And last but certainly not least.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alex Tanz. It's a privilege to talk to you. I use he, him pronouns. I'm coming to you from Seattle, Washington, although originally from Chicago. So I'm also a proud Illinoisian. I think the S is pronounced. I'm literally coming to you from West Seattle, which is the current home of the Duwamish people. Their longhouse is just down the hill from me, but Seattle is the ancestral home for the Coast Salish. And I work at the Seattle Aquarium as a marine science interpreter, a diver, and a research support diver. I have a pretty multifaceted role split between sort of supervising and training volunteers, working with the public on the floor, working with our policy and advocacy team on bringing issues to the floor, creating advocacy trainings, and then about 20% of my time is spent out in the field working with the Aquarium's research team. So pretty varied, and I spend a lot of my time in the water. As a diver, I've been diving for 25 years, an instructor for 20 of those, and it is a huge part of who I am, how I got to be in the place I was. My background from school is I was a political science major, environmental studies major, and then found myself in law school and eventually grad school. But the ocean's always been my happy place and my passion.
Man, I had to look no further than the three of you to get inspiration of my next bucket list trip. Apparently the ocean is where I'm meant to go. That's okay. We got the Great Lakes. We got Lake Michigan, which is a close second to the ocean in terms of getting that connection. So let's get it going. As always, I have a bunch of questions for these incredible people, but we mostly want to hear from you guys. So if you have a question at any point, throw it in that Q&A box. We'll definitely have time at the end, but if there's ways to interweave the questions that you all have with the questions that I have, I would love and prefer to do that. So throw those in the Q&A box. So as Laura stated, the purpose of this session, this first one, is to give you all an educational overview of core conservation policy principles, using the Global 30 by 30 initiative as an overarching example of that. So perhaps since the video kind of froze a little bit, it might be helpful to continue Dr. Enrique Sala's presentation and continue to lay down the foundation of what 30 by 30 is, and specifically what it looks like from a policy perspective. So Anupa, do you mind setting the conversation up for us by giving a high-level overview of what 30 by 30 is, and then maybe diving a little bit into what it looks like from a policy perspective?
Sure, that's a lot, but I'll try and do it. So 30 by 30, essentially the main goals of 30 by 30 are to stop biodiversity loss and to help our planet be more resilient to climate change. So when we're talking about the ocean, science tells us that we need what are called fully and highly protected areas in the ocean. So that's kind of like a wonky policy term and science term for basically marine protected areas that limit all or most harmful industrial activity. So a fully protected area means there's no human activity really going on in there. Maybe you can surf or kayak or paddle over it, but you're not taking anything from those areas. And then highly protected MPAs or marine protected areas might allow for a little bit of recreational or subsistence fishing within them. So these are the most protected areas in the ocean, and science tells us that that's what we need to stem biodiversity loss and kind of help our ocean ecosystems be more resilient to climate change. So that's kind of the goal that I'm advocating for, is 30% fully and highly protected areas, both in California state waters and around the country. And working at different levels of government, there are a lot of different tools to kind of enact these protections, trying to figure out which agencies you need to contact and advocate for, and who is in charge of actually enforcing or managing those protected areas. All of that has to play together along with public input and support and gathering everyone's recommendations and kind of finding a compromise. And it's not going to be the same everywhere. So a really good example of that difference at a different level is our National Marine Sanctuary programs in the US. So most sanctuary managers don't actually have the authority to address the single biggest driver of biodiversity loss in our ocean, which is fishing. California has said that according to their 30 by 30 goals, that those national marine sanctuaries don't count. They line a big chunk of our coastline, and they said that it doesn't meet the 30 by 30 goals. But federally, that is our mechanism to protect places in the ocean. And so it's very likely that they will count under that. I think I answered most of your question, but I guess I'll also just throw in there, because it's important, that equitable access to nature has also made its way into the 30 by 30 conversation and process. And I think that that is really, really important. But working to achieve that, I think, means advocating at a hyper local level with your city, county, local park systems, bodies like that, to make sure that people can get to the coast, they can get there safely, they can have a welcoming and kind of safe experience when they arrive as well. So I think I answered your question.
Perfect.
But Carlos, Alex, please jump in if you feel I missed anything.
Well, speaking of going to the other panelists, clearly, as Anupa is talking, you can see that this isn't something that can be achieved by a single state, a single entity, a single person, and we can't do this alone. So Carlos, switching to you, maybe can you speak to what building a collaborative network can look like for either local communities or states?
Yes, I think that's a great question. And I think also, Anupa, you did a great job covering a lot of that information on 30 by 30. So I want to add on to that. Really, how does it look like to build a network when you're talking about a goal that is about 30% of the planet that we're trying to protect? We got to bring it down to our local communities, because at the end of the day, local communities know best the places to protect, the value of those places, and science also helps a lot with identifying which ones are the most important. But for the sake of this conversation, how do you build a network of people at the local level to be able to accomplish the kind of protections that Anupa had mentioned in her answer? So in a lot of cases, whether it be California Washington, New York, states all over the country are doing 30 by 30 in their own way. You have the international 30 by 30 effort, the national 30 by 30 effort, and then you have all these states all across the country trying to figure out what is the best way to engage the public in those states as to how to accomplish 30 by 30. And I want to give one really specific example. And Baylee, I really appreciated that you had brought up that you're from Illinois, because the example from Illinois is a great one. So in 2021, Illinois passed a bill that created a 30 by 30 conservation task force. It wasn't necessarily limited to just land, because people often think that the Midwest doesn't have any large bodies of water, but you have the Great Lakes, and the Great Lakes absolutely are incorporated in the conversation of 30 by 30. So this 30 by 30 conservation task force was going to accomplish two big things. One is that it was composed entirely of a wide variety of different stakeholders. You had legislators who were on the task force, you had academics, and you also had even students who were a part of the task force. So the second component is that this task force was charged with holding listening sessions with the public on gathering input on which locations do you want us to protect, or what would be the value of, let's say, prioritizing a certain type of protection for a given area. And thankfully, recently, the task force released the report on all their findings, all the input, and it included the recommendations and, or not the recommendations, but even the specific thoughts that some of the members on the task force brought in their own perspectives. So Illinois is a great example of a state that was able to bring together a network of both academics, legislators, students, the public, all into this one process that was able to then come up with a report that was provided to the legislature and to the governor as to what should we do with 30 by 30 in the state of Illinois. And that's exciting, because guess what, everyone? It's not just Illinois. It's happening all over the country. Anupa talked about how there's a lot going on in California, and California in a lot of ways really trailblazed 30 by 30 for a lot of other states and for the country. But now a lot of other states are starting to take on their own process. And so I recommend that all of you guys who are listening in, whether you are a student, whether you are part of a zoo, an aquarium, in a museum, there is a lot that your own states are doing to get ahead on 30 by 30. Maybe they haven't started their own legislation yet. Maybe they haven't put out a recommendation or have done something like California or Illinois, but it's going to get to your state eventually. So that's the example I wanted to give.
A little fun fact for all of you. My father, who is a high school science teacher, and his students passed that piece of legislation here in our state. So here you talk about that, Carlos, just gives me, just the chills, because I know how hard they worked on that. But it just shows the example of how my dad, in a conversation with me after hearing, I got to go see that speech by Dr. Enrique Sala in 2019 at AZA. And I came home and I told my dad about it. And he and I just had conversations of how inland communities specifically can help that fight. And he decided, hey, why not us? So if you would like to know how to do that, if you are a school, let me know, and I can get you in touch with the people who specifically did that. So thank you for bringing that up, Carlos. That's really
And
cool.
I just wanted to quickly add that I included a link in the group chat for everyone to click into that provides information on this task force. Again, this is just one example, but it gives you more details.
That's awesome. Well, keeping with the concept of network and movement building, it's imperative that we as change makers ensure that everyone's voices, especially community stakeholders, are being heard. Keeping this question with you, Carlos, but ultimately opening up to you, Anupa and Alex, what are some tips that you all have for ensuring that the goals of specific conservation policies align with the wants and needs of local communities and the people that these will primarily impact?
A great question. And it goes without saying that there are certain communities that need to be included, not even just in the conversation, but in the decision-making process, because they have A, oftentimes been excluded, and B, are essential for the conversation about conservation in the ocean and the coast and the land. For instance, I'm thinking about indigenous communities that have been stewards of the land and the ocean for thousands of years prior to the arrival of Europeans. So how do we incorporate indigenous tribes input? How do we incorporate the input of certain communities, certain stakeholders? Well, I think that there's two ways to approach it. The first is, depending on the process in your own state and what they're doing on 30 by 30, there might be very specific things that you need to do to get involved and provide your own input. But on the second hand, there's an easier, less bureaucratic way to get involved, and that is reach out to your local legislator. Legislators work extensively to understand what their particular constituents feel about any given topic. And in our role as NCEL, our main job is to help legislators collaborate with other legislators on similar shared interests as it relates to, let's say, 30 by 30 or the ocean in general. And one thing that I can share with you all, and it's going to be really helpful for everyone listening in, is we co-led a sign-on letter with the League of Conservation Voters that has a list of over 450 state legislators and local elected officials that support 30 by 30. So if some of you are wondering, I don't know if my local legislator or mayor or city councilman supports 30 by 30, I'm going to send a link in the chat so you know who supported it. And this is as of 2021. And if you don't know if your legislator supports it right now, reach out and call them and express to them your particular interest in 30 by 30. So that's one less bureaucratic way of expressing your interest in this topic, other than, let's say, the stakeholder sessions that California is hosting or Illinois is hosting, but that's an example.
Anupa or Alex, anything you want to add to that?
I'll jump in. First, I'm going to give you a quick aside, Baylee, and for the Great Lakes folks. When you study oceanography, we actually study the Great Lakes because a lot of like the physics and science principles still apply because they are large enough. So I just wanted to share that little tidbit. But just building on what Carlos said, your elected officials, I mean, even if you can't vote yet, right, they technically work for you. And they're there to listen to you. So that gives you like the ultimate reason to be able to reach out to them, contact them, tell them what matters to you because they're making decisions on your behalf. You can always ask for meetings. You can always send letters, you know, use social media, have conversations with your friends and your community and your family. All of those kind of help spread. They create a ripple effect and get the conversation around 30 by 30 a little bit more mainstream and people talking about something like a biodiversity crisis, which impacts everyone.
That's awesome. I love that both you, Anupa, and Carlos kind of touched on maybe what the process of reaching out and to decision makers looks like. But communities contain, obviously, many different kinds of decision makers and influential spaces, such as zoos, aquariums, and museums. So I want to throw this over to Alex. You know, how can the people watching here and students outside of this session approach institutions like zoos and aquariums about this conversation?
So I think the fact that so many of the people watching are affiliated with zoos, aquariums, and museums already is a huge piece of that. You know, step one for the people watching, it's done. And from somebody who's been affiliated with the aquarium either as a volunteer or staff for over a decade now, kind of going back to what the last question about engaging local communities is one of the biggest lifts that we have had from an advocacy standpoint at the aquarium was moving from this is an environmental issue to this is a justice issue. And getting the board on board with that, getting our stakeholders understanding that environmental issues are justice issues has been probably one of the biggest lifts of the last decade. And young people here have been a big part of that. These are issues facing communities that sometimes our board of directors or our executives are simply not aware of. And it is those conversations with younger people who are at schools, high schools, sometimes younger, having those conversations with staff who are then elevating. And that has been a huge part of getting us more involved in coalitions of nonprofits to advocate for environmental justice for everybody, for access to green space and blue space for everybody. Although in Seattle, blue space tends to be kind of green. And the other piece of it is getting zoos, aquariums, museums on board with really working with young people in the community and how they can specifically advocate. And so that's been a big piece of what I have tried to do over about the last 3 or 4 years, is working with our policy team, developing some advocacy training. How do you talk to legislators, but also how do you talk to a school board? How do you just talk to the general public for our volunteers who are here at the aquarium, and interacting with people from all over the world? You know, we see people literally from every country in the world. And the more we can spread the word on issues like 30 by 30, the more effective we're going to be.
Kind of keeping honestly with this same theme, Alex, and keeping with you, you touched on this a little bit. Maybe we can dive a little bit further for any, especially I know that a bunch of zoo, aquarium, and museum staff members also signed up to attend this. So hi, if you're here. Thank you for doing what you do. You all of you are so underappreciated, and we see you and thank you. But kind of sticking with that, how can institutions like ZAMS better engage with young people to help build momentum with these kinds of policies, even when a lot still consider themselves nonpartisan and sort of apolitical? So
I want to break that down because I think there's a big difference between nonpartisan and apolitical. By law, the Seattle Aquarium and other nonprofits, at least the 501c3s, we have to be nonpartisan, but we don't have to be apolitical. We very much can advocate for policies that we think are going to improve Seattle, improve Washington, improve the country, improve the world. And we do. We are working at all different levels, from local to national, and working with international partners on things like restoring shark populations in Indonesia. So that non-partisan part, I think, is easy to get around. We can definitely talk to people about what we think is going to make a difference. And we can spread those words, and we can lead by example. One of the ones that we've been doing for a few years is reducing plastic, as many zoos and aquariums have been doing. It's been a big push, but we got not just sort of the aquarium on board with it, but our partners who are running things like the cafe and the gift store at the aquarium on board with reducing plastics as well. And in fact, our former chef then moved to Climate Pledge Arena, where the Seattle Kraken has started to play. And she has been doing that now at an arena level of reducing plastic waste, increasing compostable and non-reusable, or reducing non-reusable products. And so that started from what we were doing at the aquarium. And it's really cool to see that kind of grow. And we've seen it not just from a staff perspective. We have seen volunteers, including our Youth Ocean Advocates, our high school volunteer program, move from the aquarium to graduate work, and even lobbying work to keep those efforts going.
That's awesome. That kind of goes, you guys threw the best questions in the Q&A box. Keep them coming. I want to kind of combine a couple of questions of yours and throw this over to Anupa, continuing the conversation that you kind of brought up at the beginning, the very beginning, talking about ensuring green and blue spaces are equitable. What are ways, similarly to that maybe young people in inland communities or in communities that have, not even a foot in the door in terms of working towards 30 by 30, what are solutions for them, similarly on the level of ensuring that our green and blue spaces are equitable, educating friends and family? What are other things that young people can be doing that don't involve getting policy passed?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, we talk about, again, we've spent a lot of time kind of talking about like large blue or green spaces, but particularly in urban areas, there's a big lack of just like having trees in neighborhoods, which are habitat for birds and other animals and things like that, but also make it a more enjoyable living place for all of us. It helps keep things cooler and keep the temperature a little bit more balanced, helps deal with some like air pollution issues and things like that. So advocating hyper locally to, make sure that there are green spaces in your neighborhood. Can we put tree planting projects in areas that are covered in concrete? Can we create an open lot, convert an open lot that's been empty for a long time into a park? These are all really great ideas that just getting involved at your city, your county level can really make an impact. And that's still creating habitat and creating space for nature. That's my short answer.
Wow, we need the long answer, like a Google Doc or something. But I will say, as someone who just converted a empty space in their community into a food forest, believe me when I tell you, your local officials want that. They do. They are so eager to have your ideas come to the city council, come to your local school board. If you want to have it at a school, they want it. They just maybe haven't had anyone to push them in that direction. So I love that, ensuring not only that they're equitable, but that we even have them. I think that is, critical and key. I got some more. Let's see what else these say. Okay, so let's lay it out there. And this can be to any of you. What are like the first steps? Like everyone's jazzed after watching this. On Monday, what is number one? The first thing that these young people can do to move forward on either looking at even getting a task force or, getting some even local spaces protected to add to their state's 30 by 30 goal. What is that first thing that they do Monday morning? Hopefully not at school, before school or after school. What's that first thing? And anyone can take this.
That's a really hard question. And it's hard to like jump in and figure out how to navigate who makes what decision and like where the levers are. So I guess I would suggest maybe finding a local organization that is aligned with your values, whether it's an aquarium, a museum, or a zoo, an organization like NRDC. Surfrider Foundation has a ton of local chapters and even like school and club chapters. There are people who work for those organizations and all kinds of nonprofit organizations around the country. That's their job to kind of track these things and figure out how to navigate them. And we all work together. Like Carlos and I have never worked for the same organization, but we work together often on these issues. So finding coalitions and finding partners is a really great way to like leverage the things that other people know and are tracking on a daily basis and kind of add what you can, which is bringing your community and like your youth, organization or whatever, whoever you're affiliated with into that conversation and kind of like rallying voices and support. So, reach out, find out who that local network is that's working on related issues that you can contribute to and kind of bring your skill set and your value to.
I love that answer because I think it transitions really well into what I wanted to add, which is on top of finding an organization that you can get involved with and they can really be a resource and a guide for you as you're trying to navigate the complicated process of government. The other thing is you got to reach out to your legislator. You have to know who your legislator is. And once you have an idea of who they are, what their contact number is, reach out to them. You can call them, or a lot of times they have town hall meetings, and just ask, what is the process right now with 30 by 30 in my state? And oftentimes with different states, you have a different process. And so it's worth looking into whether or not you've missed that opportunity or if there's still a chance to get involved. But often the organizations that you partner with or that you volunteer with, they will do a really good job of keeping you in line with what is coming up, like zoos, aquariums, and museums. And I think, Alex, if you want to add to that, because I think that's your ballpark.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, we have worked, our YOAs have worked together to sort of implement what they think is important, bring that to legislators, bring that to other nonprofits, raise money. They have done all kinds of things as a group. And I think that collective action can be so important, is find some like-minded friends who are going to write those letters or contact people with you. A group of voices is always going to be more powerful than a single voice. And finding those like-minded people can be done through zoos and aquariums. I know that has happened at the Seattle Aquarium. And I am sure it has happened at just about every aquarium and museum. From my own personal history, I actually got my start at the Field Museum of Chicago as a high school volunteer. And I met people from all over the region who I wouldn't have otherwise interacted with. And so it's a way to expand your personal network. And you'll hear a lot of professionals talk about networking. And quite frankly, as a high schooler, I didn't understand what they meant. I had my friends in high school. But starting to expand that network can be huge. And volunteering can be a great way to start that. And for those of you who are, talk to the people you're volunteering with.
Baylee, could I connect this question to one of the other ones that's in the chat?
I think you're going to do the one very last one.
Oh, no, I didn't. See that
Okay,
one.
then go ahead, go forward.
Well, there's a question about if we think a science major is important. And I was just going to say, back to what I had said earlier, bringing your skill set to the issue in a new and creative way is super helpful, just to reach new people and get people talking about things in different ways. So even if you don't have a science major or science isn't your strong suit, could you do an art project or some local mural to raise awareness in your community? There's so many creative ways to reach new people, and having something outside of the sciences is also a really valuable way to bring in new perspectives to a conservation issue. And I'll also say that my first job was an intern at the Santa Monica Pier Aquarium. So also an aquarium background that I totally forgot about.
We're throwing it out there. I spent 2 years at Shed Aquarium because they couldn't get rid of me. I want to connect. I love all of these ideas of kind of building your team, especially as a kid who got their start in ocean conservation by building a boat of trash and sailing it down their local river. Do not recommend from a safety standpoint, but it does make a splash in terms of getting on people's radar, since science is not this kid's strong suit. But sort of using what you've got, using your superpowers, using your skill set. I want to ask all three of you, and please continue to throw these awesome questions in the chat. So this is a little bit of a longer one, but how do you get people in higher positions to take you seriously? As a young girl with bright purple hair, a lot of the time I'm dismissed as being a young, radical, scary Gen Zer, and I'm not taken very seriously. How do you go about getting officials to listen to what you say? And I think, Alex, you made a great point by kind of building your team and going in numbers. So I think that's already a great example, but I'd love to hear any other thoughts you guys have on this.
Yeah, I think, we have a lot of bright purple haired Gen Zers, radical Gen Zers, not just in our high school program, but, as adult volunteers as well. And yeah, it can be tough, and I know depending on where you are in the country, it can be tougher than other places. In Seattle, you look like our legislators. So we have that, you look like our Gen Xers here. But creating that coalition and making it clear that what you're asking, what you want is not that radical. 50 years ago, asking for clean air and clean water was pretty radical. It's it's not today. And so just keeping at it can go a long way. And eventually, it's not always overnight, but eventually you're heard.
I really love this question. I believe the person's name is Sarah. Sarah, I love that you offered us this question, because when I was hearing the question, I was thinking to myself, well, I'm a kid who grew up in the desert. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. There's no major lakes, there's no major rivers, and there's no nearby ocean. And yet I also tend to work in a space, especially when I'm meeting with legislators, whether on the state level or in my previous job, I was meeting with legislators and their staff in Congress in DC. Oftentimes I might be the person in the room who doesn't look like the legislator, or I don't look like the staffer. And on top of that, I grew up in the desert. So how are they going to even take me seriously, right? But I think that there is a really, the difference, I think one of the biggest differences with local engagement, specifically you reaching out to your state legislator or your city councilman or your mayor or your school board, is that you live in their community and they are the closest to the people, right? I mean, usually you don't hear of a lot of like political fighting happening in your local city council or in your local school board, because they're focused on getting stuff done for the community. So if you feel like your school board or your local representative is not taking you seriously, a lot of times the best way to go about that is to communicate with them as a community member, right? I'm not asking for anything radical, as Alex said. All I'm asking for is that for your neighbor who is my neighbor to just have a green space for us to go walk the dog or to go for a hike, or to just have an area next to the ocean that isn't going to be, really hard to get to. So talking about it in more everyday, normal people terms, rather than talking about it in like a very political, like, you're a Republican and you don't believe in climate change, so you don't care about these issues. No, just talk about it as more of like no, I know you care about the environment. I know you want your local community to have something that is accessible and protected. And I think that usually gets their attention more, because you're talking about something that's very inherent to the human experience.
Yeah, and I'll also just say, like, the decisions that our leaders are making are going to impact you as a young person way more than they're going to impact them and the generation of like decision makers we have. So use that to your advantage and like really tell those personal stories. I've been working in the advocacy world for a long time, and the thing that like kind of brought attention to me and the issues that I work on is when I spoke out as a woman of color who likes to fish and also supports ocean conservation. And that's what people paid attention to. So telling your stories, talking about how these things impact you and the decisions being made are going to impact you now and way farther into the future than for the people making those decisions is the way to do it.
Can I just add my
absolutely
sense here as the person with pink hair on the panel? Usually it's a lot brighter pink than it is right now. It's very faded, actually. I really relate to this question a lot. I have always related to this question a lot. I do want to point out that this specifically is something that we will touch on a little bit in session 2. So stick around. See you next weekend. But really, if your local decision makers or even state or federal decision makers are dismissing you based on your appearance, I think that tells you a lot more about them than it does about you. And it tells you a lot about how you can go approaching these issues. And again, I don't want to spend too much more time on this question because we will address this next week. I just feel like I want to tell a story about Baylee and me as young people making a difference on a federal level, but I will save that till the end of the Q&A.
Well, I just have one more question, and that's just a final word of advice for anyone, for all of you, because I know you're all jazzed after this. How could you not be? So on Monday morning or after school. What is a word of advice for the people watching as they either continue their advocacy journeys or maybe get started with that first action starting Monday morning?
My piece of advice is it's really easy to get like wrapped up in fighting for what you believe in, and, you know, protecting these places that are special to you. But don't forget to also enjoy those spaces that are special to you. Make time to play and enjoy nature, connect with nature, because ultimately that makes you a stronger advocate.
I would say engage. Doesn't matter who, doesn't matter how small, if it's a parent, if it's a sibling, if it's a friend, engage with somebody about why this is important to you.
Man, those are, I would say, retweet to those pieces of advice. I mean, like, those were really great. I agree with Anupa and Alex. Take time to reconnect with nature. Take time to talk with your family, talk with your friends. Take your friends, take your family to these places. That's my piece of advice. Don't just go alone. Nature is great for yourself, but nature is best when it's shared. And that's something I've learned a lot in the past few years. So instead of going to the arcade or going to the theaters, go take a hike or go to the ocean.
And bring a friend, take me to all of these special places. I just want to thank you, Carlos, Alex, and Anupa, so much for spending a little part of your Saturdays with all of us, sharing your wisdom, sharing your lessons learned, your advice. I can't thank you enough, all of you, for your work. It is so necessary and so meaningful. And we're just all such big fans. You guys are the reason we're optimistic. Like, it could get really, really easy to get pessimistic until you meet folks like yourselves doing the work, which I hope all of you watching here will continue to do the work to protect our planet and our green spaces and our blue spaces. Laura, take us out of here. I'm done being Ryan Seacrest.
Yes, thank you again, echoing Baylee. It has been wonderful having you all here. I am sharing my screen. I will make sure to add all of these links to a document to make sure that you guys can find them. I'm not going to spend time now trying to send them in the chat, but they will be available so that you can connect with Anupa, Carlos, and Alex's programs after the fact. And I'm so happy that we've kicked off this program. I hope that all of you have had a wonderful time. I know I have. We have a bunch more Q&A questions that, again, will definitely be touched on in our next session. It makes me really excited for next session, actually. So I do want to tell that really quick story before I head into announcements. The very first time that I ever met Baylee in person, I was 19. I think you were probably also maybe 18. And we were student delegates at a program called See Youth Rise Up, which brought 8 students from the US, Canada, and the Bahamas to New York City and to Washington, DC. And at the end of it all, when it was said and done, we were able to have a legislative meeting with the White House Council on Environmental Quality, talking about a marine protected area off the coast of New England, the Coral Canyons and Seamounts marine protected area. At the time, President Obama, very busy man, he did not have time to meet with us, but he was actually in a meeting with the people we met with about 15 minutes after we left. And then 3 months later, he signed that marine protected area into law and cited the meeting that he had with the people we met with that day as a major deciding factor in his implementation of that marine protected area. So that is very tangible proof that young people can absolutely make a difference. The youngest person in that delegation was 14 years old at the time. So I just want to end on that note and hope that that inspires you to take local action. And I hope that you guys can join us for that local action and learn how to go about it. Really quickly, before we leave, I just want to drop one quick link in the chat. This is a feedback survey that you guys will be receiving from us after each session. And that is so that we can continue to improve this session as we progress for future participants. So if you could take a minute or two after the webinar ends and just fill that out, we would really, really, really appreciate it. And you should also get a pop-up message after the fact to give you the link. But if nobody else has any more questions or the panelists have anything else to add, thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you same time next Saturday for session 2. Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your weekend.
And we'll stay on to get a picture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay. I saw Carlos write that, but I didn't see a response.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, saying goodbye in the chat. It was awesome having you all here.